Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I know some of you are taking seats, but just come in and find a seat wherever you can. So I'm Fiona Wilson, and I'm the Executive Director of UNH's Center for Social Innovation and Enterprise. It's a joint venture between the Paul College of Business and Economics and the Carsey School of Public Policy. And we really couldn't be more thrilled to co-host this event today because the center's focus is really on helping students, faculty, and also business leaders to really align their business models with the long-term health of society and also the environment. We're helping students challenge ideas about capitalism and markets and to really think about new measures of business success that include people and the planet as well as profit. And importantly, we help them connect classroom theory and business practice through the immersive learning programs that we offer in the center with our community partners. Certainly one of our most valued community partners is Durham's very own Freedom Cafe. And you're going to hear from the founder and executive director, Brian Bissett, at the end of today's program. And he'll tell you more about the Freedom Cafe's incredible work. But I just want to say a huge thank you to Brian for being our co-host for this event today, and really for his inspiration for this event. Now, he told me that tomorrow happens to be World Social Justice Day. How many of you knew that tomorrow was World Social Justice Day? Not many. There's a few hands. Excellent. And it seems all the more important, I think, when we consider a recent study, the Corporate Human Rights Benchmark, that ranks 101 of the world's largest companies who work in high human rights risk sectors. And it provides a snapshot of their performance around human rights. And frankly, the picture's pretty concerning. The majority of the world's largest companies appear to have made little or no progress in putting human rights at the heart of their business. So not only do these mainstream practices violate the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights, but they create really worrying risks for those corporations and their shareholders. Happily, today's conversation is going to paint a very different picture. We're going to learn from some inspiring business leaders who are working hard to educate about and eradicate forced labor and human rights violations in their own global supply chains. These are companies you're going to hear from today who are really demonstrating a resounding yes to the answer that the question, this event is the title of this event, which is, can people, planet, and profit coexist? I think you're going to hear a resounding yes from these companies up here today. Before we get started, I just need to say a couple of other important thank yous. First of all, we're really grateful to have been joined by Nixon Peabody, who is the lead sponsor for today's event. I'm just going to invite Andrew Scher, their managing partner, to come up and share a few words with us.
Thank you. We're pleased to be here today. As mentioned, I am not the managing partner of Nixon Peabody. I am the office managing partner of our Manchester office. Nixon Peabody is a 650-plus attorney law firm around the world, primarily based in the United States, and the 15 best attorneys, of course, are in Manchester, and I get to lead with them every day. We're proud to be a sponsor of this event. We're not here just in name only. Nixon Peabody is a forward-thinking law firm where we focus a lot of our efforts internally as well with our clients on sustainability. We are a proud participant in the Professional Services Sustainability Roundtable. We're a founding member of the Law Firm Sustainability Network. Maybe the most important for this group is that for the last 12 years, we have been recognized by the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index, and most recently receiving its highest 100% score. My background, myself, I started my career any number of years ago, 18, 19 years ago, as an in-house attorney at a little company in Exeter, New Hampshire called Tyco International, which if anyone wants to do a case study of important New Hampshire businesses, that probably is the one to take a look at, maybe what not to do when you're running a business. But as a result, I was its primary supply chain counsel and helped grow its procurement group really from its infancy. And since my time I've left Tyco, I focused my practice on that as well. So without further ado, I think this is going to be a great program. Again, we are very happy and proud to be a sponsor and look forward to what everyone has to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks again to Nixon Peabody for being an important partner in this. Also want to just recognize some other co-sponsors who are supporting the work of the Freedom Cafe here in Durham and this event, including Seacoast Rotary Club, JJR Consulting, The Darling Princess, and Timothy Noramora. We also, when we do these events at UNH, we want to make sure that this is an interdisciplinary event that brings people from all over campus. And so just a big thank you to all of our partners at UNH who have helped make this possible, including our friends in global education here at UNH who helped also provide some financial support for this event. So thank you to all of our partners for making this possible. And then lastly, I also want to thank some faculty colleagues, faculty like myself who really believe in the importance of bringing business leaders in to talk with our students. And so many of the people in the audience today are from various classes. So my own class, the students in the Business for People, Planet and Profit class, welcome to you. Big welcome also to Betsy Carter, who's brought her students from the Politics of Food and Wine seminar. I want to take that seminar next year. And then also, especially to my colleagues, Jennifer Armstrong, Nina Wingatter, and Betty Woodman, who are the faculty that now teach the required class in business ethics for all incoming business freshmen. It's been a real pleasure to collaborate with you guys, and so glad we can do this partnership. Before I introduce our moderator for today, I did want to just also give everybody a little bit of a incentive. So there's a wonderful new book that just came out called Buy the Change That You Want to See. There's actually a chapter in here on one of our companies on the panel today, Timberland. And Timberland very generously has donated a couple of dozen copies of this really great new book. So if you would like to win a copy of this book, what we are asking you to do is to take a photograph of today's event, post it to Instagram with a caption about something that has inspired you about what you hear today. And you will be entered into a drawing for, we're going to give away about 25, at least 25 copies of this book. So when you do your post to Instagram, just remember to tag us. So you're going to tag at UNHCSIE. So again, that's at UNHCSIE. And you will, hopefully, there's a very good chance of you winning one of these wonderful books. So thank you, Timberland, for donating those. We really appreciate that. So let me now just hand over to my colleague, Dr. Betty Woodman. She is a lecturer in the Paul College of Business and Economics. She teaches business ethics. She has a PhD in applied ethics and really brings an incredible background, not just as an academic, but also as a former business leader into her work. So I'm going to hand over to her. Thanks so much for doing this today.
Thanks. So good afternoon. The issue of forced labor is profoundly troubling and widespread, affecting about 25 million people worldwide. The good news is that some companies are stepping up and starting to address this issue, and we have some of them here today to be talking more about what they're doing. But the problem is enormous, and there's an awful lot more to be done. First of all, we might take a look at what we really mean by forced labor. The ILO, International Labor Organization, defines it as any work that is done under force or under compulsion, not voluntarily. And they also provide additional statistics about the different kinds of industries that are involved with that. So you see 14 million people worldwide are forced into scenarios with agriculture, for fruits, vegetables, grains, that kind of thing, or for fibers for cotton and clothing, manufacturing, construction, and so forth. 10 million of them are children. There are a variety of different categories of forced labor. In some cases, people are taken forcefully from their families or communities, and they work for the rest of their lives in a compulsory kind of situation. So very troubling situation. Those of you in business ethics course might recognize this slide from Fiona Wilson, who visited class on Thursday. And what it's really getting to is the scope of businesses and corporations worldwide, right? So here we're looking at nonprofits, and we're looking at government spending of about $3 trillion for the US. And then corporate revenue at about 20 trillion. So a huge amount of power to be really stepping in and doing something. Looking at it another way, you have corporations making up 52 of the 100 largest economies in the world, right? So if you think for a second of someone like Walmart, Walmart's annual sales are greater than the GDP of 85% of the companies worldwide, which is really huge. So what that means is that the scale, the potential is there to really make a dent in some topics like this and others. But again, there's an awful lot that needs to be done, and we're really only just getting started. Consumers also, all of you, are very important stakeholders for those businesses and corporations, and we'll talk more at the end about ways that you could get involved as well. So, at this point in time, I think what I'd like to do is welcome you here. I also remind you that as we're going through the panel discussion, if you have any questions for the panelists, you might flag them, because at the end we'll have a Q&A. So first, I think what I'll do is introduce briefly the panelists that we have here, and then each of them will describe their companies a little bit more and what's happening there. So we start here with Kim Gray. Kim is with Hannaford. She's vice president working with center store merchandising and pricing. We have Ann Karen, who is from Timberland. Ann is with social compliance and reporting and has been worked with corporate social responsibility since about 2007. And then on the end, we have, I think here a chart here that's got their pictures. There we go. Rob Everts. And Rob, along with Rink Dickinson, who is not here today, are co-executive directors of Equal Exchange. So we'll hear from each of them about their companies or organization. I think starting, Kim, with you. So thank you. Please join me in welcoming Kim Gray.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for thinking about Hannaford for this very important conversation today. I wanted to share with you a little bit about Hannaford and actually our parent company, Ahold Delhaize. We have about 375,000 associates across 22 great local brands around the world. We're in 11 countries, 3 continents. We have more than 6,500 stores across the world, with about 2,000 in the United States. And as you can tell, we have a pretty big impact on our suppliers, on our supply chain, and we have a lot of buying power. Hannaford, which is the great local brand that you all are mostly familiar with, has 181 stores in 5 states in the United States, and we make up part of those 2,000 stores in the U.S. My journey that I'm going to talk about mostly today was when I was part of Delhaize America, which was Food Lion in Hannaford at the time, and since we're part of the Ahold Delhaize Corporation. So my journey's really around that journey, and it was about 1,600 stores at the time. How we think about sustainability is planet, people, and product. So reducing our impact on the planet is extremely important through our buying practices and the things that we hold our suppliers accountable for and what we hold ourselves accountable to. Also caring for communities that we operate in. We truly care about giving back to our community, food donations, and even food waste. And then the products. What are the impacts on the environment from the products that we purchase and we sell, and also to society? 2010, we started our seafood sustainability journey for Food Lion and Hannaford at the time. And it quickly evolved to include social responsibility. And as you can see, there were lots of headlines around the social impact that the seafood industry was having on people, and mostly in Asia. So rather than just turning a blind eye to this, we actually decided to take action. It really wasn't an option to take action, and we took it from 2 different perspectives. We actually created a lot of processes within our organization, and I called it the Confident Seafood Program. And that included a supplier pledge that a CEO of every single supplier for seafood had to sign. It also came with a master vendor agreement for seafood. And these two forms was simply a signature from the CEOs, but it was also an acknowledgement that we would not tolerate or stand for any social elements that they knowingly were supporting, and that there was a zero tolerance policy. We also incorporated DNA testing because there's substitution that goes on in seafood, which is unethical, and we would never want to sell something to our customers that wasn't of the right DNA. We also incorporated strict seafood buying policies, which supported our sustainability efforts and our traceability efforts. And again, it was a zero tolerance policy, so as these CEOs would sign these documents, they knew that if they got caught up or if we caught them in anything within the supply chain of seafood, that it wouldn't be tolerated. We would no longer do business with them. And as you can remember, we're a large organization, so this significantly impacted their performance as well if we pulled out. And then we said, how can we influence the industry? So we reached beyond our own organization and joined several working groups. FMI is a grocery industry working group, or it's actually an organization which the seafood working group was one facet of it. And so we joined that with other retailers like Walmart, Sam's. It was a North American Grocery Retailers Association, so many retailers, and we talked about many issues in sustainability and social responsibility and what we could do as a group. Coming out of that group after several years of conversation was the Seafood Task Force, which is mentioned on the last line. The Seafood Task Force is really feet on the ground, and this group of retailers working with the industry and with the governments to change the behaviors and hold suppliers accountable to be socially compliant. We also require audits from the BSCI audit group for all of our seafood operators in third world countries that are at risk, so that every single facility has to be audited through this particular audit scheme to give us more confidence that we're controlling our supply chain. And we also have a sustainability requirement for our farm-raised seafood called BAP. And we actually influenced them to incorporate a lot of the BSCI audit components into their audit so that they can continue to help us control slave labor and forced labor within the audit schemes that we actually had set up for the sustainability. So we're really trying to get one audit versus multiple audits and also multiple facets so that people just really couldn't escape or intentionally enforce unethical practices on our business. And I would just like to say that, it's up to us as leaders and organizations. I was a category manager at the time, and I was one person, and I'll talk more about it later, but I took it upon myself to create all of these policies and work within our organization to get buy-in, to actually implement them and incorporate them into our daily process. And this was back in 2010, and it's still living and breathing today. So that's just a little bit, and I'm sure we'll share more in just a little while.
That's okay. This works too. So thank you very much. And then I think next we'll hear a little bit more about Timberland from Ann Karen. So please join me in welcoming Ann.
Good afternoon. I work for the Timberland Company in Stratham, New Hampshire. We are a producer of footwear, clothing, and accessories for men, women, and children. Just a little bit about me. I joined Timberland back in 1994, and I've held several positions there. I am also a graduate of UNH, and I cannot believe the changes that have happened since I was here in 1981. So Timberland is, as I said, a producer of footwear, clothing, and accessories. We currently source from over 350 Tier 1 and Tier 2 factories around the world, with the majority in Asia. And as you can see from my slide, Timberland is owned by the VF Corporation, which is a $12 billion apparel, footwear, and accessories company. We're joined by many other brands, including the North Face, Jansport, Lee, Wrangler, and Vans, just to name a few. As you can see, VF is a pretty big player. They produce over 500 million units per year, And collectively, VF brands are produced in more than 800 countries, in 800 factories, in more than 40 countries. My position at Timberland is Social Compliance and Reporting Manager, which means that I monitor all factories that produce Timberland products to make sure that all workers who touch Timberland products are in fair, safe, and non-discriminatory work environments. By no means am I an expert on forced labor, but I can tell you what Timberland and VF are doing to minimize this risk in our supply chain. From an internal standpoint, we audit all Tier 1 and Tier 2 factories annually for labor, safety, and environmental issues. Tier 1 and Tier 2 facilities include all facilities that cut, sew, pack, ship, screen print, launder, and embroider Timberland products, as well as tanneries, textile mills, and component suppliers. Once a factory is audited and approved, the factory must sign VF's Terms of Engagement and Global Compliance Principles, which state, among other things, that no forced labor is allowed in any VF facility. Part of our audit scope is to determine the presence of migrant workers, which is the population most vulnerable to forced labor. Migrant workers are often subjected to excessive recruitment fees, sometimes in excess of between $5,000 and $7,000 US. VF's current allowance is no more than 1 month's salary be paid in recruitment fees. If a violation is found, the factory is given a corrective action plan and up to 6 months to address the issue. If the issue is not resolved in this time, the factory will be rejected and no VF production will be permitted. Our sourcing teams are fully aware of VF's compliance standards and keep this front of mind when selecting new suppliers. Because of this due diligence, there is less risk of finding forced labor in our Tier 1 factories. The greater risk lies further within the supply chain, in Tier 3 factories where VF's leverage is less direct. To identify the greatest risk throughout its supply chain, VF recently conducted a global risk assessment on human rights to identify the greatest risk to workers. Forced labor was identified as one of the 5 most salient factors that they wanted to address. In order to be more proactive on the topic, deeper within the supply chain, VF became a member of the Mekong Club, an NGO based in Hong Kong whose mission is to eradicate modern slavery in Asia. Mekong Club members are required to report yearly progress towards this mission. VF is also working with the IOM, the International Organization on Migration, and is working with other major brands on a 2-year project addressing forced labor in Taiwan. Because there are many major peer brands currently producing in Taiwan, this seemed like the best starting point for us. The project is mapping out the path of the migrant worker, their countries of origin, the labor brokers and recruiting agencies they are working with, and the fees they are paying. VF is working to get these brokers and agencies to become certified as ethical recruitment agencies based on the IRIS standard, the International Recruitment Integrity System. Any VF factory using migrant workers will be required to only use these certified agencies. In addition, the American Apparel and Footwear Association, of which VF is a member, has initiated the Responsible Recruitment Commitment. By the end of 2019, all members who sign this commitment must only use factories who pay the recruitment fees of their migrant workers. Other conditions include that workers retain control of their travel documents and have full freedom of movement, and all workers are informed of the basic terms of their employment before leaving their home country. VF recognizes this is not a problem that can be solved overnight. If it were easy to solve, it wouldn't still exist. It will take cross-brand collaborations and public and private partnerships to make systemic changes across the industry. With these strategic partners, we're optimistic that it's possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last, we have Rob Everts. Please welcome him to the podium.
Does this go next?
This is it, and just go ahead and click. That's it.
Bueno, good. Hi, I'm Rob Everts, co-president, co-executive director of Equal Exchange, based in Massachusetts. We were founded in 1986 by 3 young guys who came out of the food co-op world, who really wanted to challenge the prevailing norms of international trade, really, that contributed in more cases than not, unfortunately, in a race to the bottom, where importers here of almost anything look around the world to see where they can find whatever they want as cheap as possible, and then turn it around and mark it up as high as possible. It's great to hear these examples of Timberland and Hannaford taking concrete steps, to do something very, very different from that. But it's been too common for too long. So our mission, as you can see here, reads to build long-term trade partnerships that are economically just and environmentally sound, to foster mutually beneficial relations between farmers and consumers, and to demonstrate through our success the contribution of worker cooperatives and fair trade to a more equitable, democratic, and sustainable world. In practice, what this really means is that we share risk with, we buy from organized groups of small-scale farmers, believing that power shifts really need to happen in those countries around the world. And if people are organized, they have a way better chance of changing the power dynamics and challenging the entrenched elites than if they were just individuals. So we buy from organized groups. So we share risk with farmer co-ops to build market access here for people who have really been traditionally iced out of the market and the mercy of bigger players with better connections and better resources. And it means building viable and enduring supply chains that work for co-ops and their member farmers. For us at Equal Exchange, it also means doing all this within a democratic workplace, and hence our structure as a worker cooperative, which is a whole other topic that I don't have time to get into in detail. But a lot of it is building democracy internally and putting a high premium on engaging consumers and demystifying where stuff comes from and the conditions under which things are sourced. So while Equal Exchange, boom, not happening here. Okay, all right. No?
Did it just go? Okay.
There we go. So as it pertains to forced labor, I would say, well, we weren't founded explicitly to address forced labor. Where it exists around the world, it's very clearly way up there as central and implicit in everything that we do. So more broadly, again, we're there to challenge the prevailing norms and demonstrate and build a model, instead of just challenging companies from the outside, actually trying to build a model from the get-go in all of our DNA that shows you can, build and run a business differently and still succeed in the marketplace, and one that really does take into account all the stakeholders, including worker owners at Equal Exchange, farmer partners, investors, customers that we sell to, stores, and things like that, and the planet. Our products, this is just some of them. You see coffee, tea, cacao, chocolate there, cashews, mangoes. There's also bananas, avocados. Probably in all of these agricultural commodities, to some degree, there's forced labor, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. The one that has been most visibly associated with child slavery in West Africa has been cocoa. It's been in the news. Actually, how many people here are familiar to some degree that there is actually an issue of child slavery in cacao in West Africa? Yeah, good. It's a good starting point. So one of the things we've done, in addition to just the purchasing terms that we use, has been working with groups like the International Labor Rights Forum and others to challenge businesses, the big chocolate companies, right, that have not done enough to really force change. It's not easy. Don't want to minimize how hard it is. But Senator Harkin, who is a real progressive U.S. Senator from Iowa, and a Congressman named Engel from New York, established something called the Harkin-Engel Protocol many years ago, that try to establish norms for the huge corporate chocolate industry on sourcing in West Africa. And I'm afraid a lot of those large companies have kind of dragged their feet on this one, and not that much progress has been made. Some stuff has happened, but not enough progress has been made. So just to really wrap up, we only just recently started buying from West Africa, from Togo, actually. Most of our stuff has come from Latin America, partly because there's far more availability of organic cultivation there. There's much less organic in Africa, and we are committed to that environmental aspect of what we do. But we also feel like we should start to dip our toe in where it's nastiest, in West Africa. So we're starting there. So we, again, we place ourselves in the whole fair trade system. We're the first fair trade, company in the United States to buy things, certified under these kinds of terms. In truth, that's just a shot of cacao there, a fresh pod there. The people we buy from are poor, so one of the criteria for fair trade certification is if you're a small-scale farmer, you can't have a structural year-round dependence on hired labor. I mean, it's just family. It means you can hire some people for the harvest. But so most of these farmers are quite poor themselves, and whereas I'd say there's no forced labor on these places, and we have certifiers that go through and inspect. Farmers are poor, workers are poor, and no one's making enough yet in this system. So we engage again primarily on these issues. This is just my final slide. It's just a shot of a co-op meeting to really engage and share our knowledge of the industry here with farmers to support their democratic institutions. And then in addition here, we partner on occasion with NGOs in the United States like Oxfam America, who's running a campaign, called Behind the Barcodes. It's really encouraging companies to look behind their supply chains like Timberland and Hannaford are doing, especially on seafood here on Hannaford. Really, really impressive. To encourage transparency and better treatment of women, of farmers, of workers, and others in the supply chain. I'm going to stop there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
There we go, wonderful. So thank you for those introductions very much. And you all set wonderful examples for so many people, and your companies do as well. So that leads us to a few questions we'd love to ask of you, starting with leadership. And in terms of what sort of sparked your own personal leadership journeys, to become more involved in this, to really address this issue. And I know from our discussions there are a few very interesting scenarios that you ran into. I think perhaps, Kim, we'll start with you, with Hannaford, and your mic should be live.
Sure. So I think I shared that this journey started with seafood sustainability, not with social responsibility. And George Parmenter's here with me today, and he and I had quite the journey taking items across Hannaford and Food Lion to make sure they were sustainably farmed and harvested. And through that work led us to bump into the social issues within seafood. And I was at a conference in Thailand, and there was a lot of hallway conversation. It was not a stage conversation around these peeling sheds that shrimp suppliers use. They're third-party sheds that the suppliers, the production plants, which are beautiful and very well audited, these plants use these third-party peeling sheds to peel the shrimp, which is very labor-intensive, costly to do if it was in-house. And I started to hear all this scuttle on the floor, in the hallway conversations around these peeling sheds and the slave labor, the forced labor, the child labor that was going on in these sheds. And I actually wanted to go see one, but I was advised not to. So while I was there, and there were some things, I guess I just didn't have any fear. So I just wanted to learn, and I had this appetite, I heard about it, and I couldn't hardly believe that actually would happen in the world. It was just hard for me to believe, let alone in my supply chain. And I never had any evidence that it was happening in my supply chain. But as soon as I got back to the U.S., I went straight to legal. And I said, hey, this is what I learned, and I'm not sleeping at night right now. I need to do something about this, and I need your permission. So I think one of my lessons learned, and I'm glad I went about it this way, is I went to the right people in our organization to get the support and to do it together. And they told me, absolutely. And the more you know, the more you have responsibility of making a difference and doing something about it. And that's where the journey started with the Confident Seafood Program. I started interviewing lots of people. That USDC, I actually was honest with them, the United States Department of Commerce, which governed seafood, and I said, hey, here's some issues, some true issues that I'm learning about and seeing, and what should I do, and how can I make sure this is not in my supply chain? And while I would say we can't ever be 100% certain, we can put these guardrails up that make it very, very hard for this unethical behavior to happen in our supply chain. So the suppliers can go pick on someone else and leave us alone, because I feel like we truly have all these guardrails set up to where it's just too much of an inconvenience to do it to our brands.
Well, thank you. And it's admirable, too, for you to come back and to take that kind of action. And that's the kind of thing we hope more and more companies and corporations do, right? So becoming exposed is an important thing. So Ann or Rob, would either of you like to go next? Okay, so we'll go to Ann. Any comments you'd have about your leadership journey?
Okay, so when I joined the factory compliance department at Timberland, it was in 2007, Timberland had already been auditing factories for over 10 years. And at the time, this was industry leading. But when we looked at the results that we were getting from these audits, nothing was really changing. And no improvements were really being made. So Timberland took a different approach, and instead of going in and auditing these factories like, you know, the audit police with the checklist and everything, they became more of a consultant with the factories. And instead of going in and just pointing out things that were wrong, they actually helped the factories to make changes, to determine root causes, to put management systems in place so that these issues didn't continue to happen. And we didn't even call them auditors, we called them assessors, which is really more of a friendly term and really speaks more to the relationship that we were having with the factories. And then also, instead of the factories just being, audited, and then in 12 months you come back to see if any improvements were made, our assessors were checking back every 1 month, 3 months, 6 months to make sure that the factories were doing what they needed to do and making efforts with their remediation. And then in 2011, we were acquired by VF, which, as you can see, is a very large company and owns many different brands. And they had their own way of auditing factories, which was a little bit more like the audit police. They were very strict. We were strict, but they were very strict as well. And they kind of started to see a difference in the Timberland factories and the relationships that our auditors had. And they decided that they wanted to scale that across all of the VF brands. So they created a team called the Sustainable Operations Team, which is a 29-person team that goes into the factory after the auditor has performed the audit. And they go in and they assist the factory with their corrective action plan. And then this, again, helps them to develop the root cause, determine the root cause, and develop the management systems that can stop these risks from happening and stop the problems from happening. And we've seen a big change in our supply chain because of this relationship that we now have with the factories, that it's not just going in and, okay, this is wrong, see you in 6 months. That does not, now they have the assistance that they need to make the improvements that need to be done.
Great. And in terms of making that long-term relationship solid with your suppliers and working with them, it's, again, another inspirational step that companies can do to kind of address this issue. So thank you. And Rob, I know your interest or your leadership spans all the way back to high school.
Yeah, unorthodox path to working in a business. But no, so I grew up in the Bay Area in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and if you had your eyes half open, you were kind of aware of things going on out there. You had the Black Panthers and Angela Davis and the women's movement and Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers. And so the last one is what I was ripe for it. I was ready at that moment as a senior in high school to get very involved. I saw these picket lines in front of liquor stores. There was boycotts of Gallo wine, and sorry for the retailers in the room here. There are also picket lines at other stores around the country for grapes and lettuce and things like that. So I got the bug. I did go to 1 year of college. This isn't a pitch, sorry, to drop out or anything, but I went to 1 year up in Oregon. I did drop out. I left. And I joined Cesar Chavez in the United Farm Workers. Now I stayed there for 7 years, and that was a deep learning process on how to actually practice nonviolence. Because I remember literally 40 years ago, right now, last week, because there was one of the UFW martyrs who was killed in this very violent strike in the Imperial Valley, and Chavez, a practitioner and follower of nonviolence, right, of Gandhi and King, and I remember this vivid meeting where one of the picket captains walked in with one of his people, his head all bloodied, to Chavez, right, aquí está tu pinche no violencia, here's your goddamn nonviolence, like, whoa, what, excuse me, but, what's the chief going to do on this one? And so just try to talk person back down, and it was one of those just cases that was like, whoa, just leadership, nonviolence, real world practice, reading about it. Whew. Anyway, very powerful bunch of years. Then I went on to work for human rights in El Salvador to change U.S. policies that actually were the seeds for the exodus you see still today of so many people leaving Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, not Nicaragua so much, but, now, and Guatemala. And then I came in touch with the people at Equal Exchange, and there was a path actually that seemed to connect a lot of the stuff I had done, but was actually trying to make this kind of change within the market, build this kind of social justice within the marketplace. And it really appealed to me after 15 years of being on the outside, and that's how I ended up here and pretty quickly had the role that I have here now.
So thank you. So in that case, long-standing interest in being active in these issues and pursuing that through your life's career, I guess in all cases. So thank you. Another question really would be looking at some of the nuances and complexities of dealing with this issue, right? So we know that it's horrible that people are forced against their will into forced labor situations, including children, right? And I would wonder if you would want to speak at all to how difficult that can be, either going in with an all or nothing kind of stance, or maybe looking at something that's more gradual and incremental. Any comments like that? And I don't know, Ian, if you'd like to start with this one. Maybe something about the living wage. Or...
Yes, so many years ago, living wage became a very hot topic with worker rights groups. And we were often asked if Timberland paid a living wage. So we held focus groups with factory workers in the Dominican Republic, India, and Vietnam, and asked them how their lives would change if they had more money. And at first, all the faces lit up and they thought that would be just wonderful. But then they started to think about what the presence of more money, how it would affect their daily lives. So the workers that we interviewed in Vietnam were from a factory that employed over 60,000 workers, and there were no dormitories. So 60,000 workers came and went every day and were living in rented housing. When they started thinking about it, they thought, the minute word gets out that we're making more money, our landlords are just going to raise our rents. And so then they would just be back to where they were. And that wouldn't help. And people in other countries thought, if I have more disposable income, then that's just more money that my spouse is going to gamble or is going to drink away. And unfortunately, that's a reality. And then they also shared that more money in their paychecks, it doesn't help them get better health care, it doesn't help them send their kids to better schools, because in some instances, these things don't exist. So what Timberland did, and also another issue that the workers face is access to clean drinking water. And workers are very susceptible to waterborne illnesses, which leads them to missing work, their kids missing school, their kids being sick. And when we asked workers things like, do you have access to clean drinking water? And they would say, yes. Well, when we dug a little deeper, what does that access really mean? In some cases, it meant that the worker had to get up hours before their shift started, before they went to work, and walk miles to stand in line to get a bucket of water to then carry home and then go to work at the factory. That was literally their access to clean drinking water. So Timberland took a different approach and decided to use their resources to launch a program called the Sustainable Living Environments, which addresses the needs of workers beyond factory walls. So those needs also included access to affordable childcare and access to savings and loan facilities. So Timberland began installing water towers, partnering with local NGOs and factories to build and staff healthcare and childcare facilities, and also educating workers on saving and budgeting their money. So these things were tangible ways of helping the workers that they could make them have better lives outside of the factory.
Okay, great, thank you. And again, getting creative about different ways to really be making a difference and weighing in that makes sense to the people that are actually in that situation. So thank you for that. And I know, Kim, I think you had something about the CEO and some of the addressing this issue.
Sure. I have a couple thoughts. One of the complexities, seafood in the dark blue seas, where normal people never travel to, is very unmanageable, and it feels out of reach. And the way that the industry, through this FMI working group, we created Seafood Task Force, where several retailers invested substantially, and also not just financial resources, but also people resources, to work with the Thailand government to get to the root cause and to figure out why or how we could control slaves, slave labor, passport holding, going out onto these ships and being accountable that every man or woman that's going on the ship comes back in, and they have to give them their documentation back, and it's recorded who goes out, comes back in. And there's different processes that this task force has been able to help the Thai government, because it's the Thai government who has to regulate this. It can't be corporate USA regulating it. But we've had a task of people over there for several years now, helping and working with the governments, and they're starting to shift their focus into the tuna industry. And that group has been trying to create practices that can actually uplift and go into different industries. So I'm really proud to be connected to that group. I haven't personally been involved. I know George has been more than I have, but that our company is supportive of that group and actually gives human and financial resources to it. The part about our CEO, I would say, when Thailand got into the newspapers several years ago, our CEO asked me just to stop buying from Thailand. Why not? Just pull your, don't buy. There's other places to buy your shrimp. And my response was that if I pull out, I'm going to force ladies, mostly ladies, into prostitution or into other businesses in order to make a living, and that I felt very confident at the accountability that I was giving to my suppliers, and I wanted to stay in there because I actually felt comfortable that we were actually providing them with a safe place to work that had fair wages, fair living conditions. They weren't full of child labor, and I convinced him not to pull out, because sometimes the easiest thing to do is just say, oh, we're just not going to buy from that country or that factory, rather than going in and finding root causes and actually helping them to be a place of work that's reputable.
I know, and powerful, because these issues are so distressing, and how do you best help? And it sometimes isn't just doing no business at all. It's actually helping to improve those conditions. I don't know, Rob, if you have anything on this one. Yeah, okay, great. Another question that other businesses that are looking at what you're doing might raise would be, this sounds well and good, but after all, we're businesses, and this may possibly increase our cost, right? To be doing this extra work, kind of looking at our global supply chains and looking at forced labor issues, right? So I'm wondering whether your approaches actually do raise costs at all. And if so, if you balance that with either the risks associated with company reputation or other factors, maybe loyalty to brand on the other side, on the positive side, right? And how you balance all those interests. I know we have a lot of business ethics students who are looking at those issues of profitability and social responsibility, and how do you as companies balance that? Either one. You want to start? Any of you?
I know,
Yes, thank you.
I'll just, this might be an outlier of an answer, but early on, we had a lot of debates in the organization. Should we attempt to actually pass on? What we try to do for people who studied economics, right, is internalize the externalities and just not let those get sloughed off on society, environment, things like that, workers. And so we had a lot of debates on, can we possibly pass all that on and expect to get stores to like stock our stuff and not disproportionately mark it up and consumers to pay that much more? And and that was one stream of thought, like if you're long term, you have to do that, versus short term, like, or medium term, which has turned into 30-year term. Don't expect actually consumers who, in a poll, in a survey, in any number of things, would say, yeah, I'd be happy to pay more for X. And a lot of people say that, right? I'll pay if it's convenient and comparable quality and within about 10% in price, I'll pay more. And people will do that. People will do that much. If you can meet those conditions, I think we found that people pay a little bit more. People won't pay, they want it all, unfortunately. People won't pay the full freight of what it really would take to internalize all of those things. And so at Equal Exchange, the decision we've made is just operate on smaller margins. We arguably make salaries that are a little below market, at least on the high-end jobs. We have a fairly flat salary scale, so the lower end up ones are higher. But we have not sought to pass it on because we felt it more important to be able to get products out there, to be able to start educating and engage people on these issues. And if we strike out with like every buyer at a store that we talk to, that's way too we couldn't possibly do that. We're not helping anybody that way either. So that's been our path.
I wonder, Andrew, if you might have something on this one as well.
Yeah. Is this on? Yeah. It's interesting because as the attorney in the group, I am often involved in these conversations depending on who my client is, but I'm also on the other side of it where I'm representing the supplier who's being asked to, first and foremost, respond to a request for proposal, give a quote. What can I sell my widget? What can I sell my product for? And they go through a process, and the purchaser whittles them down to 2, 3, and hopefully they're selected as the top price. And that's just the beginning of the conversation. After that, then the buyers, the companies, a lot of these are really large, sophisticated companies who have the luxury of asking and or demanding, whatever they want, and they know that they will get it because the prize for supplying an electronic component to a large cell phone manufacturer is just, that's the golden egg. We need that as our next client. So after the price is given, they are crammed down on everything. Well, we want you to certify, everything we're talking about up here. Not a problem. We already do that. Maybe some of our companies are publicly traded themselves, but we want you to pay for the audit. And after you do your audit, we also want to make sure that you allow us to come in and do our own audits. We're going to do those unannounced at any time we want to, but you need to make sure people are available to respond to our requests. They also want to have, are you able to procure materials from, war-torn countries, or do you need to avoid conflict minerals? So at the end of the day, that price that someone has whittled down and got, you need to make sure you take into account everything that's going to go into this contract, and these contracts, they are open for negotiation, but they are not your simple handshake deals, and rightfully so. But words have meaning, and all of it is intended to give leverage to one party over the other, and the wrangling that goes on is amazing. Some of these, there is a cell phone company that I'm sure 90% of people have in their pocket right now. Their contract is 50 pages long of two columns of like 8 or 9 font, and those are words, and they mean something. And what that means is that when that company wants to impress upon the seller and supplier that they're the boss, they're going to find that language, usually on page 48 or 49, buried deep, and it's meaningful, it's legal, it's enforceable. So that's part of the process. You got to be mindful of.
Okay, thank you. insight into the whole contractual part of the equation. Kim and Ann, do you have anything to weigh in there in terms of reputation or costs, loyalty, brand loyalty, these kinds of questions?
Well, I know from a VF standpoint and a Timberland standpoint is that you just can't put the price on the damage to a company's reputation when forced labor or other worker rights violations are found in the supply chain. So our best approach is to be extra diligent when choosing suppliers. And our factories are audited before any production begins. And so if we do see issues or the potential for issues, we won't move any further. But the thing I think, and also like Kim was saying, that if there's an issue that's found in our current supply chain, we don't just walk away. We help them to fix it. We demand that they fix it. Because, like Kim was saying, then the workers don't have anyone to speak for them. And then if they can't work in one of our factories, what other options are there? You're potentially putting people out of work, which is not something that we ever want to do. And also from a cost perspective, another thing that Timberland does, not around on a different topic, but we use a lot of sustainable materials in our products as well. And a lot of times people will say, oh, well, how can you make the same shoe with recycled PET or different things like that? And there are ways to do things to make products with more sustainable materials and not necessarily add to the bottom line. So there are ways to do things.
Okay, great, thank you. And Kim?
I would agree with that. So this was a non-negotiable for us, from seafood sustainability also all the way to social responsibility. The suppliers, when I first started talking about it, especially the sustainability efforts, threatened me with higher cost. And I'm the buyer, and I'm like, okay, put it on paper. Let me see what it is, because we're going to do this. And there was this supply and demand of like BAP audits, which is our farm-raised seafood audits. And then there was just lots of conversation that this was going to get into our cost of goods. And I was always open to the conversation. And I would say that maybe in the beginning, I saw some elevated cost. But as more and more people in the industry, the large suppliers, because we were doing this with this FMI working group because we don't feel like it's a competitive advantage to be sustainable. It was a industry movement that we were trying to create. So we were doing it with our Kroger friends, our Publix friends, Walmart, and making a movement. And really the whole tide rises with that. And we also, as an organization, look for ways to save within our own infrastructure and our supply chain to reinvest into this. So there was never an intentional, okay, your cost went up 5 cents, therefore the retail is going up 5 cents. And I've been associated with the seafood since 2010. There's never been any of that. If there were costs that we, maybe it's soft cost or it was hidden in inflation, we absorbed it and whatever the market would bear. If we had costs, then we would look at retails, but there was no intentional, you've got this cost because of this, therefore we're raising retails.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you all for weighing in on those questions so far. And I think we'll take a few minutes and see if any of you have questions prior to talking a little bit more with Freedom Cafe. But anyone, as you've been listening to these responses to what these people are doing personally and their companies, any questions come to mind that you might like to ask them while you have them? Yes, right here.
I have a question for Rob Ebert. So you said that you haven't really tapped more into Western Africa in regards to cocoa. I was wondering if you're planning on doing it. I myself am Ghanaian. My parents are from Ghana, so it's kind of like Ghana is well known for cocoa. So I was just wondering if you're planning on tapping into those industries.
Yeah, we are finally starting to. We've been so focused on having everything we do be certified organic as well, and traditionally, until pretty recently, there's been really little certified organic cultivation of any scale in the context of organized groups of farmers. So we have kind of the organic piece, and we buy from cooperatives or associations that are demonstrably democratic. So there are some of those now there. We're starting with Togo, actually, this year in a bar. Very, very dark chocolate bar. It arrives in about 2 weeks, 92% cacao content. And it's going to be just our first step in West Africa, because you're right. That's where, if you're going to like really seek to improve some horrible conditions, that's where you have to do more of the impact. And it's a tough nut to crack. So we feel we need to start somewhere. So we're starting.
Great question. Thank you. Anybody else have a question? Over where are we sitting? Over here, right here. Yep. Someone back there too? Yeah.
Thank you for all of you for coming today. It's been a great presentation. I'm just curious, at what level, if any, have any of your organizations been involved with working with the government around this? I would imagine in some of these countries that it's not a direct conversation just with the supplier in that country. It may be much more deeper in terms of the roots of the problem.
I would say that we, as a seafood working group through FMI, every year at the Goal Conference, we would work with the government in which we were sitting in front of, so whatever country was hosting us. And we had some really hard conversations with those governments. I remember 2 or 3 with Thailand, especially when Thailand went onto the Tier 3 watch list. We had some fierce conversations with them because it is the power of the PO. As much as you don't want to pull out of these countries, there was a lot of money going into their country from all of the grocery retailers that was sitting in front. So we were very forceful, and we gave them lots of chances over several years to make corrective action on their own before we created the Seafood Task Force, which we said we were coming in to help them get root causes and set up processes and govern what they were doing. So I would say Thailand is the number one. Like I said, tuna is more of a global issue, and it's mostly through our suppliers that I believe the tuna work is with.
Okay, great, thank you. Was there a question in the back? Back here? Yeah.
Hi, given that incentives are really, at the end of the day, going to play out as the leading factor in decision-making for individuals, entities across the board, and specifically financial and economic incentives, how do we restructure incentives so that companies have, both the ones domestically and internationally, the motivation to make these decisions on their own independently for intrinsic reasons, not through whatever imposed reasons we create?
Anybody?
I think that is just a part of the company's DNA. It's really not an option. I think for us, for Timberland anyway, and for VF, we've been very fortunate that these initiatives have come from the top down. We haven't had to convince anyone. It's really just who our company is. There's just not an option to do things any other way.
I would agree, and I'd also say that maybe now more than many, many years ago, people want authenticity, and they'll cut you some slack if you're honest and you put it out what you're doing. Everyone knows none of us are perfect. We have not nailed this, right? Supply chains, anyone sitting up here, right? But I think the more honest you can be about what you are doing and what you're not doing or what you've failed at, like share failures publicly or acknowledge where it's not. There's an element that I think you actually get rewarded by consumers in the marketplace for honesty and transparency and acknowledging where you fall short. My sense is that actually gets rewarded as an incentive.
I would agree with that. And also, there's not any laws. There's laws not to do this, but there's no regulation. Like in meat, I managed meat for many years, and there's a USDA there, and they're in the plants, and they're making sure we're doing the right things. But in seafood, there was very little regulation there, and we, as industry, have created these guardrails and these regulations, or self-governing as an industry. It's pretty amazing. Just to I don't remember the percentage, but it's a small percentage of seafood actually gets audited as it comes into the country. So it's really up to the retailers to institute these guardrails and these rules that we're holding our suppliers accountable to. I was kind of amazed when you look at, say, meat versus seafood and the difference in like U.S. regulation around it. I mean, obviously it's illegal to have slave labor, but it's not really regulated in the third world countries by our U.S. government.
Yeah, I would also say, from a corporate structure perspective, there's always the opportunity for a legal entity, a company to seek and achieve a B Corp status. And, there's an inherent tension in running a business, because if you have shareholders, your fiduciary duties are owed to your shareholders. If you're a publicly traded company, that's, what's the market price for the day, share price for the day. If you're a private company, those shareholders might be family members or other private individuals. But you're doing everything in order to maximize the shareholders' interests, as long as the company's solvent. If the company is insolvent, then your stakeholders are creditors. But a B corporation, gives the companies some latitude to focus more on sustainability, environmental protection, and being a little more, we talked about what was in the company's DNA, being a little more focused on what does that company want to do, how do they want to hold themselves out, what do they want to achieve other than just maximizing profits, again, for their stakeholders, their shareholders. So that's a marketing, angle for companies as well. Ben & Jerry's, Pete & Jerry's, Eggs. Those are companies that are known for being a little more socially active, a little more environmentally conscious, and they have great products too. But people know their products almost as well as they know how active they are socially.
Certainly, and also I'd say that consumers are really important stakeholders as well, and collective consumer interest, can also weigh into that equation. So consumers, I think everyone who is buying things, finding out about what you're buying and voting with your dollar is another way to be weighing in that equation within the capitalist company, right? So in terms of that kind of thing, how would you recommend people learn about a company, right, and what your company is doing? I know Brian in a second is going to talk about a little bit of this, but are there any recommendations you'd have quickly before he gets started in terms of learning about a company and where they stand on this?
I would recommend that if you're looking to make a purchase, go to the brand's website, because if they are doing something around social issues, they will be talking about it. And if a company is not doing anything and they're not talking about it, that means they're probably not doing anything. And do your own research. Don't rely on the media to make up your mind about something, but really do your own digging and find your own information.
Okay, great. No, that's really helpful. Thank you for your questions. I think at this point I'd like to have Brian Bissett come up, and I'll introduce him briefly and have him talk to you a little bit. Come on up, Brian. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Brian is the founder and executive director of the Freedom Cafe, and he was really the inspiration behind this event today, and we were delighted to partner with him. And he'll tell you a little bit more about the Freedom Cafe and its mission and how all of you can get involved with this. So.
Thanks so much to everyone for coming out today to participate in the panel and the conversation. Thank you so much to our panelists. This has been tremendous. I took notes. I learned along the way. So first, the Freedom Cafe is a nonprofit working to end human trafficking and the commercial exploitation of all people. We run an actual cafe just around the corner on Mill Road, and the cafe is run by a group of work-study students and about 50 volunteers. And when you come in and you purchase a product at the cafe, you have the opportunity to make a recommended donation for all of the drinks and purchases. And 50% of that covers the costs of our actual goods, and 50% of our drink purchases go directly towards a project to help end human trafficking. And those projects range from local to global. And it's an opportunity for us to learn, to engage with the issue. We see ourselves as planting a flag in our community that says this is an issue that we all can participate in ending. We all have a role to play. So how can we begin to take action? part of our mission is to provide consistent community engagement and to empower all of you, our community, to begin to take action steps, to be a part of the solution. One thing that I've learned along the way is that it takes a collaborative approach. And I'm happy to say that our friends from the New Hampshire Human Trafficking Collaborative Task Force are here as well, trying to address the issue of human trafficking in New Hampshire. And it brings together business stakeholders, education stakeholders, law enforcement stakeholders, social service stakeholders. Because as you've heard in many of our conversations so far today, collaboration is really important within a local community to change the structures and systems where our products are being grown and produced. So, is anybody after today surprised at the scope of forced labor in our supply chains? How many people are a little surprised at the scope? Right? Not as many people as I thought. If you were not surprised, I'm curious if you would consider yourself a conscious consumer. How many people would consider themselves a conscious consumer? All right, a few. So here we have it. We're not surprised that there's an issue in the world on forced labor. The truth is, a new major report came out in September 2018 that says 148 goods and products that most of us use on a regular basis are known to be produced around the world in at least 76 countries with some form of forced labor. So we have a major issue, a major crisis that we as consumers have a role to play in changing. So a couple of things that we can do. First, today, did anybody learn anything? All right, good. So I want to encourage you. It's very easy to hear and to experience something and then immediately get caught up. We're going off to classes, we're going off to study, we're going off to athletics and club events. It's very easy to just hear something, experience it, have a moment where you think, I should do something about that, and then immediately walk out and get caught up in the rest of life. And so I want to encourage you to take just a moment to write down that thought or to rethink about it in your head and say, what is that one key idea that I learned today? Couple seconds. Because the very first thing that you can do is learn and leak. You learn something and then share it with a friend. Share it with a neighbor, share it with a roommate, share it with a family member, or share it on Instagram and have the opportunity to get the Buy the Change book. Remember the hashtag is UNHCSIE. So get those Instagram photos going. All right, so step one, action step that you can take is learn and leak. Second is to become a conscious consumer. So we have a massive problem. Becoming a conscious consumer is something we all can participate in because we all spend money, right? Right? We all spend money? Okay, so some steps to being a conscious consumer. A very easy action step is to shop certified products. So you can shop from companies that are B Corporation. You can shop products that have a fair trade or a Rainforest Alliance or an Equal Exchange logo right on the product. That's a very easy action step. We learned today that supply chains are very complex. It's not that easy. You can't find every product that's certified. You also have these incredible companies here that are working hard to bring you products every day through Hannaford, through Timberland, that are very thoughtfully and consciously made. And so another step is to shop informed. So shop certified, shop informed. And as Ann said, go to the brand's website. Do a little research, do a little digging. And as Rob said, being transparent and being willing to share with the consumer, with all of us, what the successes and the failures gives you a sense of how active the brand is in being conscious themselves and bringing you products that you can feel good about. And lastly, as Rob said a little earlier, people won't pay for what an item actually costs. We know that. We know that people are willing to pay maybe 10% more for a product that they can feel good about if it's comparable. But man, there's a big role that we have to play as consumers. I was at an event here that CSIE hosted a couple of years ago, and Vincent Stanley from Patagonia said, we haven't, the brands haven't paid a living wage to the workers in the garment industry for 200 years. So we don't actually know how much a product should cost. And that's a challenging reality for us. And so somewhere along the way, over the course of our lifetimes, we probably do have to change our buying habits a little bit. And so as a conscious consumer, shop certified, shop informed, be willing to pay a little bit more for those brands if they're asking you to. And lastly, another simple option is you can always shop thrift stores. This is another takeaway. And the final opportunity, learn and leak, be a conscious consumer, and lead an organization. As Kim Gray mentioned earlier, she was one person taking personal responsibility to invest and build buy-in from her company and the supply chain and the producers. And each of us as one individual now in the social organizations that we're a part of, in the religious organizations that we're a part of the political organizations that we're a part of, in future down the line, in the employment places, that we have the opportunity to take the lead and build a strong sense of honoring the integrity of workers around the globe who bring the products to our homes. Thank you so much for being a part of this today, and happy to continue the conversation with you. Have a great, wonderful day.